Hi, and welcome back to Lemonade, the space for honest conversations about the messy middle of life. Here, we'll take life's lemons and turn them into something sweet. Now, we all go through times in life where we don't know how to name what it is we're going through, but it shows up once in a while, and it can even sit alongside a very full life. Because today, we're talking about something very close to my heart, and it's loneliness. It was the night before Christmas, and depending on who you are, that line can land very differently. For some, it means full houses and excitement over family traditions, rhythms, and routines. And for others, it can mean logistical nightmares, tension, and emotional endurance. And for the rest of us, well, it can feel like a quiet dread, a silence that gets louder and louder. It's usually when I found myself in my Bridget Jones era, when people with a genuine curiosity would be asking, "So who are you spending Christmas with, or what are you doing for the holidays?" Not realizing the answer carries more history than they could ever expect. Now, this episode isn't one necessarily about Christmas, but we have to acknowledge there is a kind of loneliness that sharpens around the holidays, milestones, and moments that are really meant to be shared. They can look a certain way on the outside, but feel very differently on the inside. And for a long time, I thought loneliness meant that I was doing something wrong, that I had fallen behind or failed, missed a turn perhaps. But actually, loneliness has many origins. It can stem from grief, heartache, family distance, geographical locations, timing. For some people, it's a season, and for others, it's more of a constant companion. It's not loud, not overwhelming, but it can just be present. And if I've learned one thing, it's that loneliness doesn't discriminate. It doesn't necessarily wait for old age, and it doesn't disappear with achievements. It can show up in teenagers that are trying to figure out who they are in a world that's always watching, or it can be in young adults, people surrounded by crowds and yet starving for real connection. I have friends who are building full lives and still wondering why something feels missing. I include myself in that, because loneliness, it's not always the absence of people. It's the absence of a deeper connection, one where you can feel cherished. And for me, that's lived in the background of most of my life. And yet I've worked hard to build one that is full and meaningful, filled with amazing people and fantastic community and creativity and purpose. But deep down, there's a low-level ache, one that I have tried to plug. And it's not something that derails my life, but it is there and it's very real. Even in moments of joy, even when I'm proud of the woman that I've become, the loneliness can sting. Yes, it doesn't negate the life that I've built, but it can coexist with that. So I just want to talk about that because I don't feel like it gets enough airtime. We talk about loneliness like it's something you can grow out of or something you can solve, but actually, it doesn't just happen when life hasn't gone right. It can be there, sometimes not of your own making, sometimes in the shadow of a longing and knowing that you have someone who is walking life alongside you, not because you're not strong enough to do it on your own, but everything in life is better when it's shared. And that's just how I feel. Real meaning, real depth comes from a life that's lived with purpose, connection, and for me, faith. Loneliness didn't arrive in my life all at once. It came quietly, and then it stayed, and then it lingered. Because this isn't a story about just one Christmas or a difficult season. It's a story that has stretched decades of my life through different versions of me, in different cities and different continents even. In my 20s, loneliness felt confusing, but I just assumed it was temporary, something I would outgrow once life lined up, got married, had kids, way that people do life. But then in my 30s, it felt heavier, less confusing, more familiar, and I began to recognize a pattern. And then in my 40s, well, we won't even go there. But there's one Christmas I keep coming back to, not because it was especially painful, but because something in me shifted that day. It was in the UK at a family gathering. The house was full and it was warm in a way that it always was. Shoes by the door, coats piled on the bed, kids running around, the smell of incredible food they'd been cooking since the early hours. I arrived with a bottle of wine and a smile, ready to pitch in and help out. And at first, things felt fine. I helped in the kitchen, chopped vegetables, washed dishes, did the tasks that were asked of me, and people were grateful. We joked, I was needed, and that felt good. And at some point, the conversation then turned to plans for the year ahead. People talked about their moves, weddings, babies, the way those conversations naturally open up. And I just stood there listening, wondering if it was okay to quietly grieve that I didn't feel that I had weight to my life. Where I was living felt inconsequential. What I was working, who really cared? All the things that were practical and manageable were not really what fulfilled me. My grief just felt invisible. And later, when we sat down to eat, couples paired off, children were ushered to their usual spots, and I just waited. Not because there wasn't a seat for me, there always was, and I'm so grateful for that. But really because I didn't quite know where I belonged. I wasn't really part of a unit. Someone gestured to a chair that made me feel like I should sit there, and I did. And then during the meal, someone asked me half jokingly, "So, any news we should know about?" Everyone laughed, of course, why wouldn't they? In that moment, something decided to stay quiet, and I gave a safe answer, a deflecting one. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I know it's something I'd used before, and I'd rehearsed it for these kinds of conversations. And sometimes it was kind and playful. Other times it was just humor that went wrong, the kind that was well intended, but it stung. And I learned how to answer quickly or just smile and make the moment pass. And I realized what I'd done. It's not that I just didn't answer the question. I had made myself smaller, not because anybody asked me to, but because it just felt easier than naming the actual ache. And later that night, after the dishes were done and the house had settled, I went upstairs to the room I was staying in. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my clothes, and it just hit me. I wasn't sad because I was single. I was sad because I'd learned how to edit my own longings and not really wanting to inconvenience anybody. That was the moment that I understood that something I hadn't acknowledged before, that loneliness wasn't just about being alone. It was about just having nowhere to really put what I was carrying. So that night I prayed, and not so eloquently, probably more through tears. And honestly, I just told God that I was tired of having to always adapt to everybody else's life, and tired of being grateful on cue, tired of pretending this still didn't matter. And I just remember thinking that I don't want to harden. I don't want to be ungrateful, but I needed to deal with whatever I was feeling. And that Christmas, where loneliness stopped becoming theoretical, I started living something that I felt within my own body. I learned how to answer quickly, yes. I learned how to smile and make moments pass. But underneath it all, there was always this familiar ache. Because year after year, I hoped the answer would change and that I could give some good news. But year after year, I didn't. And what I didn't realize then was just how much effort it took to carry that quietly. I learned how to brace myself before gatherings, how to stay busy, how to be useful, how to distract myself and others. It was just easier than letting myself be seen. Then, of course, there'd be the car rides back home and landing in my own home, stark contrast in decibels. And that's when the weight of everything would just really hit me hard. The questions, the grief, the prayers that I didn't know how to say out loud. And I wasn't just grieving the absence of a partner, it was also the grief for a life that I thought I'd be living. And the photos that didn't exist, the traditions I wasn't building, a sense of being rooted somewhere but nowhere at the same time. Loneliness, you see, it doesn't always come from just being alone. It can come from even being surrounded by people. And I've belonged on paper, and yet the emotional homelessness, it's not cured by proximity. You can share meals with the most amazing people, have the best conversations and routines, but there's no one really carrying the weight of life with you day to day. And for a long time, people would look at my life and they'd see freedom and escape, and they'd be like, "You're so lucky. The grass is greener," and all of that. Loneliness, it's not measured by how busy your life looks. And I have been guilty of that. I have made my life very busy at times just to escape it. But it's about that inner weathering of the holidays, the sharp loneliness when homes are empty and people return somewhere, but it's never to you, it's going elsewhere. You realize that your space is a place where people visit. It's a loneliness of visibility, but without an anchoring. And then, of course, there's a loneliness that is much harder to name, one that exists inside connection. Because I've been there too, in dynamics where I wasn't alone on the surface, but I felt more lonely than I ever did by myself. It's where present wasn't equivalent to safety, where closeness required performance, and, well, something essential was missing underneath the surface of it all. That kind of loneliness, that's very confusing, because from the outside, everything can look fine. But from the inside, you start questioning yourself. Why do I feel empty? Why doesn't this closeness feel comforting? And why do I feel lonelier here than I did on my own? It asks you to confront a really hard truth, that being with the wrong person or people in the wrong dynamic can cost you way more than being alone ever could. And that's when I learned something that was really important, something I didn't want to learn, but that I needed to. Because once you've known emotional absence within a connection, well, you stop romanticizing being with somebody at any cost. You start wanting something that is slower and real and kinder, something that feels like rest. I was also being asked to live with uncertainty, not just within relationships, but the future generally in the shape of my life. Where was it going? What would I be like in 10, 20 years from now? What would come next? How much of the future was I actually allowed to see and to get excited about? Because for a long time I resisted that too. I wanted clarity before I could move forward. I wanted answers before I could trust, and I wanted certainty before I could surrender. But life didn't offer me that. Instead, it offered me moments where the only option was to keep going without knowing what was on the other side, how that story would unfold. And there were seasons, and there still are, where surrender didn't feel peaceful. It felt like more grief, like loosening my grip on things I still wanted was taking a piece of me. I didn't know how to make sense of that and how to process it. But I had to learn the difference between surrender and giving up. Because giving up, I realized, is what closes the heart, and surrender keeps it open, even when it hurts. Surrender meant stopping the internal negotiations. If this doesn't happen by now, then maybe I should just stop hoping. That's a slippery slope, and honestly, not one I'd recommend. I would question if I even was somebody that was doing life right. But then I realized life isn't transactional. And, well, faith, it's not about certainty. It's about choosing to stay present in a life that you don't fully understand and one that you can't even see. I've had to adapt the unknowing by not becoming numb, but being honest about what it is that I still long for, what it is that I don't have answers to, and what's it like in the waiting period. Some days it can look very peaceful and calm, and other days it can feel stormy and confusing. It can feel tearful. You can catch me in the middle of a moment and receiving disappointments and letting go of unanswered questions, making sure that I don't shrink my capacity for joy. That's the game changer. I don't know what's coming or what the next seasons will look like in my life. This is maybe my forever state, who knows? But what I'm learning to do is to stay soft on the inside, in that wait, in the messy middle, building my life, even when it looks far different from what I imagined it would be. How to surrender to outcomes without surrendering my desires. That's been a really tough lesson. And learning to keep my heart open without trying to find a guarantee that goes with it. That's been a hard lesson, one that I've had to learn to do better. This episode isn't just about singleness as a label. It's about loneliness as a human experience. Singleness is just one way that loneliness has shown up in my life. But it's not the only way. There are so many different versions of what loneliness can look like. Sometimes it's forced, shaped by timing, loss, or life just not unfolding the way you'd hoped. At other times, it's chosen. Because staying connected to the wrong dynamics, well, that can cost you way more than being alone ever could. Being alone for a long time carries assumptions, especially when we talk about single life. Because at this age, it can be weird, and it can also create suspicion. Maybe you're flawed. Well, FYI, we all are. Maybe you're difficult or undateable. But living under those assumptions quietly, year after year, it can weather you down. The truth is, I do struggle with loneliness even when my life looks great. Even with a full life that's meaningful, full of rich friendships and opportunities that I'm so grateful for, that longing has never left me. It's a yearning. It's not about trying to avoid what comes with it. It is what it is. And it's not about abandoning myself to avoid that pain. I can enjoy my own company as much as the next person. But I believe that humans by nature are made for deep connection. I know what it's like to be lonely on my own, but I also know what it's like to be lonelier with somebody who isn't safe, who isn't present, and who isn't aligned. So sometimes loneliness isn't failure, it's self-respect, choosing solitude over shrinking, honesty over performance, and self-trust over settling. And yes, that choice can come with a cost. The cost is loneliness. But the prize is peace. Loving myself well has taken years, and sometimes it's meant saying no to the wrong kind of closeness. And that's the squeeze. But you can be deeply grateful and yet still deeply lonely. You can love your life and yet you can still grieve what's not in it. You can be faithful and capable and surrounded by the best people, but that deep longing, it doesn't go away. It's not something you outgrow. It's something you carry and you learn to live with it. Not because your life is lacking, but because your longing is real. This is where I want to pause and bring in a coaching lens, because loneliness is not just something to survive. It's something we have to learn how to live with in a way that doesn't leave us empty or bitter. In Lemonade, I use a simple framework called sip and pour. It's not a solution, but it's just a way to take care of yourself. Sip is what you take in, and pour is about what you release. Going back to the Christmas story, it holds more than a memory. It holds patterns. Standing in the kitchen, helping, smiling, staying useful and editing myself so that the moment would pass more easily for others. And that's really where sip and pour meets real life. What I was doing back then, although I didn't realize it at the time, was pouring constantly and sipping almost nothing. I was pouring effort, adaptability, and even emotional restraints. And on the surface, it looked generous, it looked amenable, but underneath it was costing me. So let's talk about this through the lens of sip and pour. Sip. Back then, I didn't sip the loneliness, I silenced it. I told myself just to be grateful, not to make things awkward or to be difficult. I didn't want a pity party, but I did feel the ache. It might have looked like acknowledgement that it really did hurt, that sipping loneliness was a truth that had to exist and that it shouldn't be rushed past. Now it looks like me staying with those feelings, really connecting to that instead of trying to distract myself or shut it down, letting grief just have a few minutes of airtime, praying without editing my words. Sip is what I didn't give myself back then, but it's what I try to give more to myself now. And then there's pause, because that night I poured where it was easiest, into being helpful, to being agreeable and just being this version of myself that didn't ask too much. But pouring wisely, that's not about giving more. That's about pouring on purpose. And now that looks quite different. It looks like choosing relationships where I don't have to edit myself, choosing conversations where I'm free to share, and even if that might be uncomfortable. It's about choosing not to pour into dynamics where I just disappear to keep the peace. Sometimes pouring wisely might even look like not pouring anything at all, just prioritizing my own needs in my own way. And sometimes it's easy to shrink your desires to make others more comfortable. But these days, I am really trying to be more aware of the spaces where I find my sense of belonging. Loneliness doesn't ask you to pour more of yourself into the world. It asks you to sip more honestly and to pour more selectively. Loneliness is not a signal that you're failing at life. It's purely feedback. Feedback that just shows us where we've been self-abandoning. And also where you need to come back to, where you need to invest more of your time. But most of all, pouring is about how to protect your energy, how to prioritize your peace. I try to love myself better, not by hardening or settling, but by being true to what I know I want my life to be about. Sip and pour can look different for different people. So I want to offer you this as an invitation to try to make a shift in your life. Take it or leave it. It's completely your choice. But if you're somebody that is carrying a loneliness right now, I wonder what it might look like for you to try something different. To start with, sip might simply mean just letting yourself name what it is you're actually feeling without the need to correct yourself. Not explaining it away, not diluting your needs, and definitely not comparing yourself to somebody else's pain. Not rushing to be grateful, but just sit with what you're feeling and notice it. Where does that ache show up for you? How does it manifest? Is it louder at night, on weekends, or in certain conversations with certain people? And then as for pouring, I'd like you to ask yourself where your energy is going. Who or what are you giving of yourself that leaves you feeling smaller, emptier, or more tired than ever before? And just as important is, where are you holding back just because it feels safe to stay invisible? Sip and pour isn't about doing more. It's about choosing differently and showing up more wisely. It might look like you're pouring less into one draining space, but pouring a little bit more into something that's nurturing and also grounding. It might look like saying no, where usually you might overcommit or over-explain, or saying yes to areas where you know you've been wanting to spend more time. So if all you do this week is just notice that, that's enough. It's not about fixing loneliness. It's about learning how to live with it and to move through it so that you can just enjoy life for what it is. Be gentle with yourself. And as I come to the end of this episode, I just want to say clearly, you don't need to rush yourself through this. As somebody who knows the ache of loneliness, I just know it doesn't go away. We might change our relationship to it. We might find other ways to find our purpose and to experience joy in our life. But that's what this is about. We're not here to sugarcoat and gloss over things that are painful. I'm here to help you turn them into purpose. If loneliness is part of your story right now, then I just want you to know there's nothing wrong with you. You're not behind and you're definitely not failing. And you certainly don't need to become someone who doesn't feel those aches. Learning how to live with that and finding ways to not shrink your needs, that takes work. And that's where coaching comes in. I'm not here to fix you or to give you advice, but to really help you explore your life and find clarity through that chaos, to find a purpose in the pain. Even when answers aren't clear, there are ways that we can go deeper. So whether you're navigating loneliness, you're in a transition or a season of uncertainty, you are very welcome to explore coaching with me. I'll offer some details in the show notes, and of course you can DM me or go through the website or the link tree. There's no pressure. So if Sip and Pour resonates with you and it's the heart of how I coach, well, I'd like you to reach out to me. Let me know what it is I can help you with. Just know you don't have to carry life alone. And please, if you know somebody else that's struggling with loneliness, share this with them. Maybe they might need the same words that you do. So the more conversations like this that can reach a wider audience, the less people have to struggle alone. If you'd like to stay connected, you know where to follow the Pour for many future episodes about this and other themes from life. And however this season looks for you, I just hope that you find moments of softness and the courage to keep going. So thank you for watching. Stay with me. Reach out if you want help getting through the messy middle. But for now, please feel free to share, subscribe, or just enjoy the content that's coming from this Lemonade platform. Take care.